This week we are covering Chapter 11, Health and Well-Being. What affects health? Our behaviors and attitudes are critical in keeping us healthy, helping us regain health following illness, and helping us achieve well-being. Health psychology is a field that integrates research on health and on psychology. It involves the application of psychological principles to promote health and well-being. Health psychology is interdisciplinary. Social context, biology, and behavior combine to affect health. Well-being. It is a positive state that includes striving for optimal health and life satisfaction. How do people's personalities, thoughts, or behaviors affect their health? The biopsychosocial model. This is a model of health that integrates the effects of biological, behavioral, and social factors on health and illness. It contrasts with the traditional medical model that views the individual as a passive recipient of both disease and treatment. Here's a diagram that displays the biopsychosocial model. The psychological factors include thoughts, actions, lifestyles, stress, and health beliefs. Social conditions include environments, cultural influences, family relationships, and social support. Biological characteristics include genetic predispositions, exposure to microbes, brain and other nervous system development. Causes of mortality. In the United States, people are now more likely to die from the following than from infectious diseases, and this includes heart disease, cancer, strokes, lung disease, and accidents. All of these causes of death are at least partial outcomes of lifestyle. Daily habits such as poor nutrition, overeating, smoking, alcohol use, and lack of exercise contribute to nearly every major cause of death in developed nations. Health disparities. Worldwide, racial and ethnic groups have large disparities in health. Although life expectancies have increased in the United States over the last 4 decades, African Americans continue to have a lower life expectancy than white Americans. The reasons that racial and ethnic groups experience differences in their health include genetic variation and susceptibility to some diseases, access or lack of access to affordable health care, and cultural factors such as dietary and exercise habits. Here's a graph that shows life expectancy based on race and gender. Although life expectancy has increased in the United States since 1970, you can see some groups fall behind others, as displayed here on the graph. In impoverished countries, the resources may be lacking to provide adequate treatments for many health conditions such as HIV, malaria, and rotavirus, an intestinal virus that kills over 500,000 children each year. Differences in health behaviors have long-term consequences for people's health and expected lifespans. The addition of more westernized lifestyles in countries like India and China, such as eating junk food and engaging in less physical activity, has led to dramatic increases in diseases related to obesity. The Japanese tend to live very long lives. Their longevity is no doubt due to a combination of genetics and behavior. Pictured here is a 99-year-old person and a 91-year-old person, both from Japan. Obesity has many health consequences. Body mass index, or BMI, is a ratio of body weight to height used to measure obesity. People with BMIs over 25 are considered overweight, whereas those with BMIs over 30 are considered obese. There are at least 2 issues with the use of BMI to predict health. BMI does not take into account age, sex, bone structure, or body fat distribution. A clear relationship between BMI and health outcomes does not exist except for the very obese. To determine your own BMI, find the point at which your weight and height meet on this graph. According to the traditional view, beyond or below the recommended weight range of 18.5 to 25 means you are at greater risk for health problems. One recent approach has been to calculate body shape index, which considers the amount of abdominal fat relative to BMI. This method was found to predict health outcomes better than BMI did alone. A meta-analysis looked at 97 studies that included nearly 3 million individuals. The researchers found that people who were slightly overweight, BMIs of 25 to 30, had a lower probability of dying from any cause during the study periods than people with recommended BMIs of less than 25. Slightly obese individuals, BMIs less than 35, did not have a greater risk of death than those with BMIs under 25. Individuals with BMIs over 35, however, were much more likely to die. Individuals with low BMIs are at increased risk for premature death, particularly if they are elderly. Another meta-analysis studied 32 studies of nearly 200,000 people over the age of 65. Those with BMIs around 28 had the fewest deaths, and those with BMIs that were under 23 or over 34 were much more likely to have died. The take-home message is that being slightly over the recommended BMI is not as unhealthy as once believed and may even be protective. It is increasingly clear that maladaptive eating habits, such as eating junk food, are likely responsible for much of the poor health associated with obesity. People who eat food high in both fat and sugar tend to store more body fat in the abdomen. Storing fat in the abdomen may have more influence on health than the amount of fat that is stored. Metabolic syndrome is a constellation of risk factors that includes high blood sugars, insulin resistance, in which the body produces but does not use insulin efficiently, high blood levels of unhealthy cholesterol, and cardiovascular disease. People with low BMIs but large amounts of abdominal fat are at higher risks for poor health, whereas people with high BMIs who have fat distributed throughout their bodies are at lower risk for health problems. The global rise in obesity. According to the World Health Organization in 2016, obesity has doubled around the globe since 1980. Although developing nations are lower overall rates of obesity, their populations are becoming obese at a greater rate than developed nations. In the United States, the rate has jumped from less than 15% of the population in 1980 to 38% in 2014. Having a BMI over 40, extreme obesity, now characterizes nearly 1 in 12 Americans. The percentage of obese children has quadrupled since the 1960s. About 1 in 6 children in the U.S. is obese, with African American and Hispanic children much more likely to be so. This graph shows the trends in overweight, obesity, and extreme obesity among adults over the age of 20 in the United States from 1960 to 2014. So you can see how these trends have gone. Food availability and overeating. An increase in the variety of available food is another factor that contributes to maladaptive eating and therefore obesity. Rats that normally maintain a steady body weight when eating one type of food eat huge amounts and become obese when presented with a variety of high-calorie foods within a study. Humans show the same effect, eating more when various foods are available. People also eat more when portions are larger. If you were presented with this table full of delicious foods, how many would you eat? Would you be tempted to try them all? As shown in this graph, the rats will become obese if given ample variety. So the graph on the right is the graph from that study involving the rats. And the picture on the left is a lot of yummy food that we'd all probably try a whole lot of. Social and genetic influence. Body weight may be socially contagious. Obesity tends to run in families. BMI of adopted children is more strongly related to the BMI of their biological parents than to the BMI of their adoptive parents. Estimates of heritability of body weight range from 60% to 80%. Genes predispose some people to obesity in environments that promote overfeeding. Friends tend to influence one another's sense of what body weight is appropriate, and thus friends often have similar body types. The stigma of obesity. In most Western cultures, obese individuals are viewed as less attractive, less socially adept, less intelligent, and less productive than their normal weight peers. Perceiving oneself as overweight is linked to depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. Not all cultures stigmatize obesity, though. In the United States, the standard represented by models is 7 inches taller and 55 pounds lighter than the average woman. In some places, people find larger body shapes more desirable. Consider these welcoming women of the island of Psy200 in French Polynesia. By contrast, consider the skinniness embodied by these models in the United States in the picture on the lower right. Dieting is seldom effective and may contribute to eating disorders. Diets fail primarily because of the body's natural defense against weight loss. After the body has been deprived of food, it needs less food to maintain a given body weight. Body weight is regulated around a set point determined primarily by genetic influence. Although it is possible to alter body weight, the body responds to weight loss by slowing down metabolism and using less energy. Restrained eating. Restrained eaters are people that are prone to dieting and then to excessive eating in certain situations. Reward systems in the brains of restrained eaters seem to encourage additional eating after the eaters break their diets. Binge eating by restrained eaters depends on their perceptions of whether they have broken their diets. Reliance on cognitive control of food intake rather than internal states of hunger and satiety also become a problem. Disordered eating. Anorexia nervosa. This is an eating disorder characterized by excessive fear of becoming fat and therefore restricting energy intake to obtain a significantly low body weight. Fewer than 1 in 100 meet the clinical criteria of anorexia nervosa as described by the most recent version of the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Those who have anorexia view themselves as fat even though they are significantly low weight, often with BMIs under 17. About 15 to 20% of those with anorexia eventually die from the disorder. Bulimia nervosa. This is an eating disorder characterized by the alternation of dieting, binge eating, and purging, which is self-induced vomiting. This affects approximately 1 to 2% of women in high school and college. These women tend to be of average weight or slightly overweight. Although bulimia is associated with serious health problems such as dental and cardiac disorders, it is seldom fatal. Binge eating disorder. This is an eating disorder characterized by binge eating that causes significant distress. The American Psychiatric Association officially recognized this condition as a disorder in 2013. People with this disorder engage in binge eating at least once a week, but they do not purge. Many are overweight or obese. This is more common among males and ethnic minorities. and eating disorders are due partly to genetics. Smoking is a leading cause of death. According to the World Health Organization in 2008, increasing numbers of people are smoking in low-income countries, and 5.4 million deaths are caused by tobacco every year. According to the 2014 U.S. Surgeon General's report, just under 1 in 5 American adults are current smokers. Smoking is blamed for more than 480,000 deaths per year in the United States and decreases the typical smoker's life by more than 12 years. Every day, approximately 3,200 Americans ages 11 to 17 smoke their first cigarette. About half of young smokers will likely continue smoking into adulthood, and if current smoking rates continue, 5.6 million American children alive today will die prematurely because of smoking. Regular smoking dropped from approximately 13% to 6.6%, with a 33% drop in the number of adolescents who even try smoking. Starting smoking. From an educated point of view, it is hard to imagine any good reason to start smoking. Similar influences are the leading cause of adolescent smoking. Social influences. Adolescents are more likely to smoke if their parents or friends smoke. False consensus effect. If they incorrectly believe that smoking is common, they may take it up to fit in with the crowd. Research has shown that smokers are viewed as having positive qualities such as being tough, sociable, and good with members of the opposite sex. Over time, casual smokers become addicted to nicotine. All right, the glorious portrayals of smoking. In some AMC series with this guy playing some preacher, he's got his picture here with a cigarette just kind of hanging out of his mouth. This was used extensively in advertisements for cigarettes when I was growing up. Every turn of a page in the magazine had some sort of image just like this. Somebody just striking a pose with a casual cigarette hanging out of their mouth as if they don't even care to smoke it. I do believe, though, this is quite powerful imagery and causes a lot of people to start. Electronic cigarettes. A new nicotine delivery system has become increasingly popular. E-cigarettes. According to the 2014 U.S. Surgeon General's report, approximately 6% of U.S. adults have at least tried e-cigarettes. A positive aspect of e-cigarettes is that they deliver nicotine less harmfully than regular cigarettes, which contains thousands of chemicals, many of them cause cancer. E-cigarettes also do not produce secondhand smoke, which can be harmful to non-smokers. Health officials do not yet know whether e-cigarettes are better or worse for individuals and society than traditional tobacco products. Quitting smoking. Many people who smoke worry about the health risks and consider quitting or do attempt to quit smoking. One widely used method is nicotine replacement therapy, such as smoking e-cigarettes, chewing nicotine gum, or wearing a patch that delivers nicotine. Prescription medications may also play a part in efforts to quit. You may have seen advertisements for these medications on television. Numerous behavioral treatments encourage people to quit as well. Only 10 to 30% of people are able to quit smoking over the long term, even in the most effective treatment programs. 90% of people who successfully quit do so on their own, going in what is called cold turkey. Three ways to quit smoking involve replacing the nicotine delivery system, as in the picture on the top left, using an e-cigarette. Another option is chewing nicotine gum, as displayed in the upper right, or wearing a nicotine patch, as shown in the bottom picture. Exercise has numerous benefits. The more people exercise, the better their physical and mental health. People feel good because they know the exercise is good for them. It builds self-confidence, helps in coping with stress, and also enhances the growth of new neurons and the production of synaptic connections. At least 30 minutes of daily exercise is associated with the most positive mental state. Those with better fitness in middle age are likely to enjoy much longer lives, less likely to have heart problems, and are at much lower risk of most types of cancer. A meta-analysis found that exercise is as effective as medications for preventing diabetes or heart disease or promoting recovering following heart attacks. Fortunately, it is never too late to start exercising and receiving its positive benefits. Researchers have concluded that exercise reduces cognitive decline in older adults with moderate memory problems. Why are people afraid of flying but not of driving or smoking? Like many people, you may be at least somewhat anxious about flying. A statistical expert explained the risk of death from flying this way. It's once every 19,000 years, and that is only provided the person flew on an airplane once a day for 19,000 years. What about being a victim of terrorism? Do you fear that? After the attacks of 9/11, the number of people who died in automobile accidents because they chose to drive instead of fly far exceeded the number of people who were killed in the attacks. The more that the press reports crimes and acts of terrorism, the more that people feel that they are likely to become the victims of crime or terrorism. This is also an example of the availability heuristic. According to Gallup surveys over the past 2 decades, different percentages of Americans have worried that they or their family members will be victims of terrorism. Fear increases after terrorist events that are widely reported by the media. So you can see the axis on the left is Americans very somewhat worried about terrorism. That rises and falls according to various media events based on terrorist attacks. You can see they line up right with that. There tends to be peak worries after well-publicized attacks, such as 9/11, the Boston Marathon bombings, and the Paris mass shootings. According to a report from the U.S. Department of State in 2012 for the year 2011, 17 American private citizens died as a result of terrorist actions. In terms of thinking about their health and well-being, people often fear the wrong things. We tend not to be worried at all about the things that are most likely to kill us. People are most likely to die from causes that stem from their own behaviors, which they can learn to modify. A report released by the Centers for Disease Control in 2014 indicated that over 250,000 early deaths could be prevented each year if people made better health choices. Why do people fear things that are unlikely to harm them, but do not worry about the things that are truly dangerous? As previously mentioned, the availability heuristic, which refers to believing information that comes most easily to mind. The press widely and dramatically reports plane crashes, as when headlines blazed for weeks of the disappearance of the Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. Figuring out the risks associated with eating a hamburger and French fries is much more challenging. The health effects are much more delayed versus a plane crash. Stress is a response to life events. Stress is a type of response that typically involves an unpleasant state such as anxiety or tension. A stressor is something in the environment that is perceived as threatening or demanding and therefore produces stress. A coping response is any attempt made to avoid, escape from, or minimize a stressor. Eustress is the stress of positive events, and distress is the stress of negative events. How do you cope with the stress in your life? What makes your strategies effective? There are different types of stress. Somebody has to stop and change a tire. And studying can also be extremely stressful for students. Do you have strategies that help with that? Psychologists typically think of stressors as falling into two categories. Major life stressors, which are changes or disruptions that strain central areas of people's lives, such as having your first child. And the other category is daily hassles, which are small day-to-day irritations and annoyances, such as driving in heavy traffic, dealing with difficult people, or waiting in line. The student stress scale. How stressed out are you? To determine the amount of stress in your life, select the events that have happened to you in the past 12 months. You can read through all these events, and if they've happened to you, you can add up the numbers. Next to each event is a score that indicates how much a person has to adjust as a result of the change. Both positive events, outstanding personal achievement, and negative events, major personal injury or illness, can be stressful because they require one to make adjustments. Add together life change unit scores to determine how likely you are to experience illness or mental health problems as a result of the stress of these events. Stress has physiological components. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA, is a body system involved in stress responses. This helps the body prepare to respond to the stressor, such as fighting an attacker. Stress affects organs after the stressor has been removed. Early childhood stress is a risk factor for developing psychological disorders later in life. Excessive stress disrupts working and long-term memory. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, as a stressful event, will set off a complex chain of responses in the body. The stressful event is interpreted by various brain areas. The hypothalamus, which sends out chemical messages to the pituitary gland, which releases hormones, and the adrenal glands, which release cortisol. That is a stress hormone. General adaptation syndrome. This is a consistent pattern of responses to stress that consists of three stages: alarm, resistance, and exhaustion. The alarm stage is an emergency reaction that prepares the body to fight or flee. The resistance stage is when the body prepares for longer, sustained defense from the stressor. And exhaustion stage. This is when various physiological and immune systems fail. A psychologist described three stages of physiological response to stress. As shown here, the body may progress from alarm to resistance to exhaustion. Sex differences in responding to stressors. The fight or flight response is a physiological preparedness of animals to deal with danger by either fighting or fleeing. Women and men often respond differently to stressors. The tend and befriend response is females' tendency to protect and care for their offspring and form social alliances rather than fight or flee in response to threat. Oxytocin is a hormone that is important for mothers in bonding into newborns and may encourage affiliation during social stress. The fight or flight response. This response is an organism's tendency to prepare for dealing with a stressor. Here, the man on the left appears to be the aggressor, and if he strikes, the man on the right will need to respond, such as by fighting or fleeing. But let's face it, this is soccer. This is drama. Neither of these guys are ever going to touch each other. In fact, one probably barely touched the other, and the other is writhing in perceived pain for effect in hopes of a red card or a green card. How does stress affect health? Over the long term, stress hormones negatively affect health. Chronic stress, especially psychosocial stress, is associated with the initiation and progression of a wide variety of diseases, from cancer to AIDS to cardiac disease. Many people cope with stress by engaging in damaging behaviors, for example, smoking, drinking alcohol, using drugs, and eating junk food. Stress disrupts the immune system. The immune system is the body's mechanism for dealing with invading microorganisms such as allergens, bacteria, and viruses. Stress alters the function of the immune system. Psychoneuroimmunology is a field in which the response of a body's immune system to psychological variables is studied. Lymphocytes are specialized white blood cells that make up the immune system. There are 3 types: B cells, T cells, and natural killer cells. Some types of B cells are able to remember specific invaders, making for easier identification in the future. You have a lifelong immunity to some diseases once you have been exposed to them naturally or through inoculation. The T cells are involved in attacking the intruders directly and also with increasing the strength of the immune response. Natural killer cells are especially potent in killing viruses and also attack tumors. Brief stressors, including final exams, decreasing the ability of white blood cells and natural killer cells to fight off infection. The immune systems of those who tend to be particularly anxious or who are already juggling a bunch of other daily hassles tend to be especially vulnerable. Short-term stress boosts the immune system, while chronic stress weakens it. Healthy volunteers had cold viruses swabbed into their noses. Those who reported the highest levels of stress prior to exposure developed worse cold symptoms than those who reported being less stressed. Here's an example of that study. The hypothesis is stress reduces the ability of the immune system to resist viruses. The research method is they swab the noses of healthy volunteers with cold viruses. The results are participants who reported higher levels of stress before being exposed to the cold viruses developed worse cold symptoms. Conclusion: the functioning of the immune system can be impaired when a stress response is activated. Stress increases the risk of heart disease. Coronary heart disease is the leading cause of death in adults in the industrialized world. Key predictors are health behaviors, for example, bad eating habits, smoking, and the lack of exercise, and personality traits related to the way people respond to stress. Type A and B and heart disease. We're talking in terms of personality traits. Type A personality versus type B personality. The type A personality behavior pattern is a pattern of behavior characterized by competitiveness, achievement orientation, aggressiveness, hostility, restlessness, impatience with others, and inability to relax. A type A personality is a strong predictor of heart disease, as is high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and smoking. The type B behavior pattern is a pattern of behavior characterized by non-competitive, relaxed, easygoing, and accommodating behavior. Hostility and heart disease. The most toxic factor on the list of type A personality behaviors is hostility. Hot-tempered people who are frequently angry, cynical, and combative are much more likely to die at an early age from heart disease. Multiple studies conclude that hostile, angry people are at greater risk for serious diseases and earlier death than those who are more optimistic and happier personalities. Personality traits predict heart disease. People with type A behavior pattern are ambitious, aggressive, and impatient, and they tend to respond more to stressors. Type A's are more likely to develop heart disease. In the picture in the upper right, people with type B behavior pattern are non-competitive, easygoing, and relaxed. They are less adversely affected by stressors and so are less likely to develop heart disease. In the picture on the bottom right are people with hostile personalities are hot-tempered, angry, and combative. They have strong physical responses to stressors and are more likely to experience heart disease. And I suppose road rage would be a really good example of that. Physiological effects of stress on the heart. Being stressed or feeling negative emotions can cause heart problems in one of three ways. People often cope with these states through behaviors that are bad for health. Some personality traits, such as hostility and depression, have negative effects on people's social networks and on any support they may provide against stress. And third, negative personality traits and stress can produce direct physiological effects on the heart. The heart pumps nearly 2,000 gallons of blood each day, on average beating more than 100,000 times. Like aging, stress decreases blood flow by making blood vessels less able to dilate. Over time, stress causes wear and tear on the heart, making it more likely to fail. Chronic stress leads to overstimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, causing higher blood pressure, constriction of blood vessels, elevated levels of cortisol, increased release of fatty acids into the bloodstream, and greater buildup of plaque on arteries. In turn, each of these conditions contributes to heart disease. Coping reduces the negative health effects of stress. To deal effectively with stressors, we use cognitive appraisals that link feelings with thoughts. A psychologist named Lazarus came up with a two-part cognitive appraisal process. This includes primary appraisals. This is a part of the coping process that involves making decisions about whether a stimulus is stressful, benign, or irrelevant. Secondary appraisals are part of the coping process during which people evaluate their response options and choose coping behaviors. Anticipatory coping. This is coping that occurs before the onset of a future stressor. Types of coping. There are two general coping categories. Emotion-focused coping is a type of coping in which people try to prevent having an emotional response to a stressor. And then there is problem-focused coping, a type of coping in which people take direct steps to confront or minimize a stressor. Most people report using both emotion-focused coping and problem-focused coping. Positive reappraisal. There are three strategies that can help people use positive thoughts to deal with stress. Positive reappraisal. This is focusing on possible good things in one's current situation. If you've ever heard the phrase, the silver lining, that represents this. Downward comparisons. This is comparing oneself to those who are worse off. Creation of positive events. A strategy of giving positive meaning to ordinary events. Individual differences in coping. People differ widely in their perceptions of how stressful life events are. Stress-resistant or hardy people are capable of adapting to life changes by viewing events constructively. Hardiness has three components: commitment, challenge, and control. Numerous studies have found that people high in hardiness report fewer negative responses to stressful events. Generally, some people are more resilient than others, better able to cope in the face of adversity. The broaden and build theory is a positive emotions prompt people to consider novel solutions to their problems. Some researchers believe that people can learn to become more resilient. Being positive has health benefits. Positive psychology. This is a movement that emphasizes the strengths and virtues that help people thrive. Its primary aim is an understanding of psychological well-being. Scientific study of faith, value, creativity, courage, hope, and happiness are all part of positive psychology. According to positive psychologists, happiness has three components: positive emotion and pleasure, engagement in life, and a meaningful life. These 2009 data are from Gallup's Wellbeing Index. Each day, 500 people in the United States were surveyed about their lives, emotional health, work environment, physical health, healthy behaviors, and access to food and shelter. The data reveal a general pattern of people's satisfaction with their lives. The green color is lower well-being, gray is moderate, and purple is higher well-being. So I suppose life is a lot less stressful in North Dakota or Montana, not sure. Across multiple studies and types of measures, positive emotions are related to considerable health benefits. Higher levels of hope and curiosity are associated with reduced risk of disease. And a positive affect, or being generally positive, has multiple beneficial effects on the immune system. Social support is associated with good health. Social interaction is beneficial for physical and mental health. Men with fewer friends were 2.3 times more likely to die than comparable men with more friends. Women with fewer friends were 2.8 times more likely to die than comparable women with more friends. Ill people who are socially isolated are likely to die sooner than ill people who are well connected to others. Social support helps people cope and maintain good health in two basic ways. People with social support experience less stress overall. Social support needs to imply that people care about the recipient of the support. The buffering hypothesis. This is when others provide emotional support and the recipient is better able to cope with stressful events. Trusting others is associated with better health. Trust is associated with that and a longer life. 160,000 people from every state in the United States were asked to answer a simple question. Most people can't be trusted. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? In each state, as the percentage of respondents who believed most people cannot be trusted increased, so did the percentage who reported that their health was fair to poor. The hormone oxytocin appears to increase trust. One way that oxytocin might increase this trust and well-being is by increased social bonds. Here's a graph of the 160,000 people in the United States that were asked if they agreed that most people cannot be trusted. So you can see the higher the mistrust, the higher of the reporting of fair to poor health. West Virginia has me worried all the way up there by itself. Kentucky, sadly, not far away. Spirituality. Studies show that people who are religious report greater feelings of well-being than do people who are not religious. Religious beliefs serve as a buffer against stress. People achieve and maintain well-being through the social and physical support provided by faith communities. Many religions support healthy behaviors, such as avoiding alcohol and tobacco. And benefits may come from a sense of spirituality, the feeling that our lives are something more than just a momentary blip in the universe. And with that concludes Chapter 11. This was not a long chapter. Thanks for listening.